Being in Gaza, although it was very difficult, and we saw tragedy after tragedy, and the most horrific scenes, I was in and amongst people who I would consider the best of us. And I felt that in being in Gaza, I was really on the front line between what is good and what is evil. Except, contrary to what they said in the beginning, we were the ones representing goodness, because we were fighting for life and justice and equality and all those things that they claim that they stand for. And yet now the facade has fallen and the truth has been unveiled. And so, being ripped away from that land, although I walked from there after, of course, the ceasefire and after the March of Great Return, I feel that I should be there. And so I'm longing for that land, and I'm longing for those people. And I'm sad as well. I'm sad because of what I see in the international media, I see from our international leaders. I'm disappointed. When I was in Gaza, the day definitely came where it felt like, and certainly speaking on behalf of the people of Gaza here, they were drowning and they were gasping for breath. They were trying to keep afloat because of the number of casualties that had kept coming through the door in our hospitals and the destruction in and around us. And they had had enough. They were just saying, enough, just leave us alone. Just leave us alone, just let us be. And so when the ceasefire came, people just wanted to believe that this was the end. And then when they saw that it was permitted for us to return to the north, and of course I walked with the people of Gaza to the north, there was an element of hope. And although when they got to the north and they saw the sheer and scale of destruction that was there, you know, you'd find it difficult to think or believe how hope can be inspired. But despite that, there was still hope for the future. When you hear announcements like those made today, they're trying to kill hope. And extinguishing hope in man is really a devastating emotional blow. But as I've said before, I've looked into the eyes of the people of Gaza. You will not conquer them. No matter how you try, whichever way you try to cook this process of removing them from their land. And it's taken many shapes and forms, of course. And the US had Joe Biden doing its bidding for the first half, and now you have Trump doing the second in a different way. But ultimately, they've used different strategies for the same purpose, and that is to remove the people of Palestine from their land. But they will not succeed. What we were trying to do was trying to deal with emergencies and all those patients injured from before at the same time. So I'd start, I have a semi-elective list of patients with injuries that need to be dealt with, but they've not just come through the door. Because otherwise this backlog, and there are hundreds of thousands of these, will just be completely neglected. And that is kind of what was happening and is still happening. Permanent injury, permanent disability, amputations waiting to happen, or deterioration in health such that it will eventually lead to death, and so on. You need to address those injuries. So we had a list where we would plan that list. So we'd go and we'd just get going with our list. Let's say now we've started our first case, 9 a.m. or thereabouts. And then, for example, we hear there's a mass casualty incident. So we stop, we run to the ER, and we help in the mass casualty incident. And here it's just, indescribable. The chaos, the blood, the death, children on the floor, some of them gasping, taking their last breath, some of them with brain out, some of them with bowels out, some of them posturing in such a way because they've got such a severe brain injury. Children with bullet injuries to the brain. At one point, I had 4 or 5 on the floor, dying, making the choice between who dies and who doesn't, because we have limited ventilators. Child coming in who is about to arrest, and you cannot do CPR because you cannot afford to give 4 or 5 people to one patient in a mass casualty incident. And so the ER doctor says, no CPR in a mass casualty incident. You just have to let that child die. It was horrific. And so we spent our time there, and we would go back, and then there'd be emergency surgery. So, you'd have a patient bleeding out, for example. Those were the ones that you needed to do life-saving surgery for. And so we'd jump in those operations. And of course, we're talking about like the Palestinian doctors as well, and nurses and anesthesiologists and, all of them in full swing and full effect, everyone throwing every last bit of energy at them, all the ORs occupied, trying to do our best for absolutely everybody. And then the mass casualty incident will, and also when one hospital might receive all these incidents, what they will do is they try to disperse some of the injured to other neighboring hospitals as well. What was left of hospitals, just to share the load, because no single institution could cope. And so then we'd finish, like the wave of the mass casualty incident would die down, and those that have died, and those that we've saved have been saved. And then you have problems of critical patients, for example, not having anywhere to go because there's no ICU capacity. So they'd occupy an OR. And then, oftentimes they would just slowly deteriorate and then die, despite all of that effort to try to save them. Not necessarily fairly basic medication, but just, when you're offering a healthcare system is based on it, fundamentals of, having equipment, having medication, having personnel, a clean environment, a safe environment. When you have a breakdown in any one of those, then the system starts to become defunct. If you have a breakdown in all of them, then I don't know what was keeping the hospitals alive, except for the good faith and the will of the people. So the WHO would be the ones pushing to try to get aid in. There was also the Jordanians pushing to get aid in. And those were the two only sort of routes for aid to come in. And it was extremely stifled. It was never enough. I mean, I remember when we had heavy bleeding in patients, using a big piece of gauze called an abdominal swab or abdominal gauze, we had to wring it from blood to be able to reuse it. And there were many times where we didn't have drapes or gowns. We'd have to try to think outside the box about how to create sterile fields. We didn't have appropriate antibiotics. We didn't have diagnostics. There's not a single MRI scanner in the whole of Gaza left. It was destroyed. In the major trauma centers, such as Shuhada Al-Aqsa hospital, there was not a functioning CT scanner. So these mass casualty incidents, you couldn't get appropriate diagnostics. There was equipment missing, and no analgesics. People came out of pain-killing medications. People came out of major surgery screaming. The hallways sometimes would be like, honestly, it would be like just scream. I remember thinking and talking to my colleagues at the time, and I said, "Wow, this is it's like a horror show. Just the corridors, people screaming, waiting to have wound changes done." Because think about this, right? You have mass casualty incident. Some people survive. They have horrific injuries. I tell you,
Tell us.
I mean, the chunks of their bodies missing, limbs missing, and huge gashes in their body, and scars from head to toe. And you need to change the dressings on these patients. They get infected very quickly. So they were daily, like 3. So in Al-Aqsa hospital, we didn't have the main OR facility was due for renovation, and then the war started. So what they had was the sort of the obstetric area where they used to do, there was 2 ORs for gynecology surgery and 3 delivery suites. Those all became ORs. There were major surgery happening in the delivery room, which is like a cubicle. No lighting. When it was in the summer, it was extremely hot. And you can't fit in any equipment. It was terrible, just a terrible place, terrible situation. And everyone tried. So oftentimes outside the mass casualty incident, those 3 cubicles in particular were for changes of dressings, just constant cycle, like hundreds of patients coming in, because you need to give them some kind of strong sedation. You know, often we had ketamine or propofol. And so they would do a mixture of those and allow dressing changes to be performed. But you cannot afford to give each patient really the time that they need, because it would clog up the whole entire day, and you have hundreds of patients waiting. So you're just dabbing on wounds really. And by the end of the day, that corridor used to smell so badly because of the air of infection. And I often used to say, man, someone that didn't have an infection, if came in, they would definitely take one on the way out. It was just a horrific situation, really. And don't forget, you know, when you have to do daily change of dressings for some of these patients, and you have to give them ketamine, their tolerance increases, and now you're creating like a different problem of a dependency.
Right.
For so many patients. I mean, there are just so many layers to this that many people haven't even considered or can think of because they haven't experienced it. When you go there and you see it and you live it, and I spent 7 months there, and my last mission was 4 months. By the end of the time that I was there, this was the words of the Ghazans. I was one of them. I was fully embedded in the healthcare system, and I lived like them. And it was an honor for me, by the way, of course. But I really got to see and live and experience what the war meant to so many people. So what I should say, just as a precursor to that, is that I missed the first half of the war. And talking to many of my colleagues, and this really should be the focus of a documentary and an investigation into these 2 sieges of Al-Shifa. Yeah, of course, never proven. There was never any tunnels. And you remember the graphic where there was this tunnel system under Al-Shifa Hospital and the main headquarters. It was all nonsense. It was never proved and never demonstrated.
Yeah.
But I walked in Al-Shifa Hospital. I saw it. When I went in my second mission, when I went to the north of Gaza, which was, of course, for me, something I had to do. I had to get to the north because the north was the most desolate, the most deprived, the most desperate, the most in danger. And it was much more difficult to get to the north as well. More dangerous. There was no safe zones and so on. But I had to get to the north. And I walked the halls of Al-Shifa. I was just gobsmacked. I was in shock. The hospital was destroyed. It had the original building. They had the ER completely laid to waste. And I went to the specialties hospital, which was a relatively new building, like 3-4 years old. The pride of the medical system in Gaza, by the way, if not all of Palestine. And one of the largest hospitals in the whole of the Middle East. It accounted for 40% of all medical output in the whole of the Gaza Strip. It was destroyed. The stairwell was detonated. The buildings were burned. The grounds were laid to waste. There were hospitals turned on ambulances turned on its side. There was a mass grave outside. And then when you got speaking to the guys that worked in Al-Shifa, who are now, a lot of them displaced in Al-Aqsa, you thought to yourself, wow. I mean, and the things that happened in Al-Shifa were just beyond what you could fathom. You're talking about multiple people in the same OR having surgeries. You're talking about people having dressing changes in the corridors without any analgesia. You're talking about people dying and being left to rot for 2-3 days before being allowed to be buried in the courtyard. And the Israelis would get some of the staff to be like, right, you guys, you're going to go pick up the corpses and you're going to bury them outside. Just because, for whatever kind of humanity that was left. The siege of Shifa and what happened in Shifa was just something that needs to be investigated, needs to be documented. That's the first thing I'd say. I was in the building of the specialties hospital. We looked outside. Of course, there were no windows, nothing left. I peered over a destroyed wall. You could see just many hospital beds that were burned and thrown over the edge. And in the distance, you could just see a huge space that was turned to just sand. And that was the place where many people had been buried. And the staff were telling us how they're trying to now relocate many of these bodies and offer these individuals a dignified burial in a graveyard somewhere else. And that's not the first time I saw a graveyard in a hospital, by the way. Mass grave. I saw it in Al-Nasser as well during my first mission. Yeah, when I visited Al-Nasser hospital, it was still recovering because it was still laid to waste at that time. Khan Yunis was still destroyed and uninhabited, but some of the buildings had been destroyed, and you could see when you walked there, it was defunct at this point. You could see the graffiti on the walls and the writings and the emblems that they had left behind, their legacy, and so the Israeli soldiers done it. It was like little graffiti. You'd see Star of David. You'd see sort of etchings of in Hebrew of certain. I didn't understand, and then there were symbols. I didn't know what the symbols meant. I don't know. They were like their sort of logistical markings and so on. But you could tell that an Israeli force had been here. So to give you to make you understand the point I was making. In the north of Gaza, there were, for example, I think only 2 vascular surgeons. These guys were in demand, and only so many places they could be at once. And so if I'm in an OR, and in the other OR there's somebody bleeding out, I have experience dealing with vessels, so it's not a completely new specialty to me.
Yeah.
But I'm the one that's going to come and help them. That's not to say I'm better than the guys that are there. No, of course not. It's just to say sometimes I was the only one there. And in fact, I worked with many vascular surgeons there, and they trained me. They trained me, and they recognized, okay, this guy, we need to get him to a standard because he might be the only person there. So they are the ones who trained me in vascular surgery. And there are many heroes in Gaza: surgeons, nurses, anesthesiologists, anesthetic technicians, the porters, the security. There are the recovery nurses, the people on the wards. I am telling you, there are many unsung heroes there.
I'm sure.
There is one vascular surgeon in the south who is just on call 24/7, going from hospital to hospital to hospital to hospital in an ambulance, so that he doesn't. So they move him around in an ambulance in the hope that he doesn't get targeted, particularly at night. Oftentimes, mass casualty incidents used to happen in the evenings or towards Fajr time. And in order to move around at night, it is extremely dangerous. So as a blanket way, anyone moving around risks their lives. So if a surgeon is coming at the middle of the night to the hospital, they're risking their life, even in an ambulance. But that's the safest way possible. They would be doing this on a daily and just saying, this is what I must do for my people. Honestly, the surgeons there, I take my hat off to them. They are really phenomenal surgeons, but they've had to deal with so much. And it's you go in saying, okay, I'm coming to help and so on. Okay, let's see how you hold on like that for 6 months. Missions, people who came on missions oftentimes be here for 2 weeks or 1 month at most. That was the maximum. Very rarely did people stay beyond that. So I understand that there are around 14,000 patients who need to be evacuated. These are the most critical. I would argue more, because there's a broken healthcare system. So unless you're able to have a parallel system where you rebuild the healthcare and are able to treat, whilst evacuating the most needed, that number is actually much greater. Part of the ceasefire negotiations was the stipulation that patients, the most needy, would be evacuated from Rafah.
Yeah.
I think the number is around 50 per day. The Israelis are falling short on that agreement. Patients are still stuck in Gaza. One of my other patients, Hiba, and I will tell you about her injuries. This is beyond tragic. She will lose her arm probably in these days because she could not be evacuated either in time. It seems to be an ineffective process, 50 per day. My other concern is when they go into Egypt, where do they go? Where do they stay? And then there's the process. There's another stagnation process before they then move to other countries. You know, it's just such a complex scenario. But there are thousands of people in need, and particularly children. That's those with direct consequences of war. And then you're talking about other children and adolescents and people, for that matter, with cancer. I know a medical student that has an aggressive cancer that we could not treat there because we didn't have chemotherapy. We didn't have an MRI to make a proper diagnosis. So what happens to her? There's just so many people. Hiba, I'll tell you about Hiba.
Yeah.
Hiba is 12 years old. She was the victim of an airstrike which caused a huge injury to her arm, where it basically destroyed the nerves and also cut the major artery to the right arm, which left it paralyzed. They did major vascular surgery at the time to reattach the vessels to keep that arm alive. She had a fracture to her left arm and a nerve injury on the left arm as well. So she's got partial nerve injury to the hand, but some function, very little. She has shrapnel injury to the thoracic vertebra, where it caused complete paralysis of both her legs. Oh. She had a fracture to her left leg, which was open. And not that was not enough for anyone to go through. She's now, as a result of being bedbound and malnutrition, severely underweight, and she has pressure sores everywhere. Her sacrum, her heels, her elbows, everywhere. And when we attempted to try to get the right arm working again, she had problems in healing. And so the wounds just broke down, and her vessels started to get exposed, and she developed complications. And she nearly died. I had to do CPR on her in the OR to save her. And then we didn't have a choice between her arm and her at that point. She became so unwell that we had to tie off the vessel in her arm because I ripped over the cover to see her, and I saw this girl that I'd become and that I've started to know very well, just like slumped in a position. I thought, my God, we can't let her die. No way.
Oh my God.
Please, Ya Allah. So we did CPR and she came back, but then we decided she was not in a fit state to pursue any surgery for her arm anymore. So we tied off her major vessel to her arm, and it's probably been amputated. That all happened because we could not get her out.
Evacuate her.
Yeah.
And she's
also one of our patients that needs to be evacuated.
Yeah.
There are many. I mean, each one of them has a story.
Of course.
The 8-month-old whose leg I tried to salvage and I couldn't, and I had to amputate, whose mother died, and I operated on her mother. Moments before I operated on her, her mother died before us. And her father and her other brother had died at the scene of the airstrike. And she had shrapnel injuries all over, and she had injuries all over her face and her neck. She had a laceration from this side to the other side. Almost as if someone had slaughtered her. It's just, the suffering is just so deep and so huge, and it takes all forms of life. We're just touching on some aspects, we're touching on some stories. There are thousands of people like this, each with a story, each with a tale, each with pain, each with suffering. I think as a people, and I mean this with respect to the people from that land, for example, Arabs, we've always turned to the West to the US to save us, hoping or praying or, just thinking that they were ever going to come and turn against Israel in defense of Palestinians. And that is the greatest delusion. The greatest delusion is that. We've seen the collapse of human rights and what war crimes represent and so on. You've seen the double standards. We've lived it now for 15 months plus. We know they don't hold any value anymore. So us continually turning to that for the solution is just wrong on so many levels. The solution must come from inside. We've all been on our journeys as individuals. We found ourselves in difficult times. But then a moment must come in your life where you say to yourself, will I continue on this journey or will I make positive changes? And I think that time has come for us as a people. Enough relying on someone who's never coming to help you. We must turn to ourselves. We must be unified. As Muslims, we're always bickering, looking at differences, not what unites us. Look, we all want to see a peaceful world where people live and are allowed to be successful and look after their families, and where nobody kills one another, nobody transgresses against another, nobody steals from another. This is the vision we all have, and that's what most humans have, in fact, of any denomination. But if I can address our Muslims, brothers and sisters, it is to say, if there was ever a time to be united, it is now. Palestine has always united us as a cause, and this must be our flag that we all rally behind to help our brothers and sisters in Gaza, in the West Bank, in Lebanon, in all the areas, and also expand it to Africa, where there are huge human rights violations in Sudan, in the Congo. We're now seeing problems happening near Rwanda as well now. So, this fight for righteousness is a universal one, and it begins with unity.